Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 61, recording on Tuesday, February 25th from Indianapolis. These studios are a hotel room. If you are listening on audio, you do not see that I am posted up with beds behind me, but that's what you got to do here at the Indianapolis NFL Scouting Combine. As always, the show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the local area. They do phenomenal work in the community. The banking is really easy to use. So if you have interest in opening an account and having some great online banking, the link for First Resource is in the description. I highly recommend you guys go check them out. So I'm recording this from my hotel room. I am fresh off some conversations with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings general manager, and head coach Kevin O'Connell. I've seen about everybody, and I'm going to describe to you the combine before I get to some of my stuff that I've got so far. I'm going to do a show today. I'm going to do some more takeaways on Thursday. Then we'll get back to guests with draft stuff. But just so you know how this works. I mean, if you've been to Indianapolis and you've been downtown, you know that everything is very packed and tight together. You can walk everywhere. There is a great convention center that is a monstrosity. Like, I walk through there and I'm like, how big is this place? How much is the real estate footprint? It doesn't make any sense to a sports writer like me on how that would be possible, but I say all of that to set the scene. Essentially, it's 6 hotels. There's like 5 blocks, and everybody within the NFL is in this tiny vicinity. I kid you not. I just got back to my hotel room, and in an undisclosed hotel here in Indianapolis, and I had just been writing at one of the hotel bars where, seated about 10 feet from me, was Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner. And behind me was Josh McCown, the Vikings quarterbacks coach, talking to former assistant Vikings quarterbacks coach Grant Udinski, who is now the offensive coordinator of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, and honestly, 5 feet from us in a different direction was Keenan McCardell, the Vikings receivers coach. So you are in the vicinity of every NFL person, coaches, agents, NFL personnel, like I just said, Roger Goodell. I mean, when I checked into my hotel on Sunday night, the lobby, I could hear Mike Tomlin's voice. And I'm not going to impersonate him, but you guys know Mike Tomlin's voice, and you would hear it from a mile away. And I turn around, I'm like, that's Mike Tomlin. He's talking to Mike Vrabel. So that is what the Indianapolis, that's what the scouting combine is. It is a chance to get in-person time with a lot of people that you either know from around the league or see throughout the season. It's a chance to meet new people, and I always appreciate and enjoy doing that. And then there's a media aspect of it. So Tuesday, on the day you're listening to this, or if you're listening to it Wednesday, the day before you're listening to it, there's press conference being done by almost every coach and GM across the NFL. Funny story, while some of the beat writers were talking to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and head coach Kevin O'Connell, Howie Roseman, the GM of the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, walked up, and there was a funny little interaction. But that's just the type of thing this is. You're walking around hotels, you're schmoozing with people, drinking, having a good time with a lot of people across the NFL. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year, and you can probably hear that in my voice. The good thing is, right now, listen to my voice, it's probably less tired than it's going to sound Thursday. By Thursday, after some of these nights, I'm not sure how, succinct my sentences will be. Not that they are succinct always, but it's a long week. It's a fun one. You hear a lot of stuff about the organization, and it gives you a really good feel going into free agency. And it's crazy that the NFL calendar works this way, but literally a week from Monday, this upcoming Monday, so not even less than 2 weeks at this point, free agency will be starting. And as you guys who have followed the NFL and the Vikings know, I mean, players jump off the board because while the NFL has rules tampering rules, a lot of agents and team people are interacting, and they kind of get a feel during this combine week in person of what's going to happen free agent week. So it is a blast. There will be stories to tell. I'm sure there will be many stories that will go untold. I'm also sure because they always are at the combine. And then there's great shrimp cocktail at St. Elmo's and Harry and Izzy's, and great food all around. So it's always a good time. I'm gonna start this thing. Like I didn't structure this with any news or notes. I know the subjects that you guys want to hear me talk about. And the first one is obviously related to Sam Darnold. What I would say to you is, for right now, and I'm speaking Tuesday, anything you hear definitive on the Vikings are going to do this, the franchise tag, this, another team is completely interested, like a lot, I'd say all options remain on the table. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said that, so it's easy for me to say that, but I know just having spoken to people beyond just those press conferences, that's just the reality. Is right now, the way this thing usually works is the player and his representatives will gauge the market throughout this week, and that will provide a pretty good indication. Now, the one thing I will say, I mean, with the tag and trade specifically, so for those who don't know, I guess and you might be asking, like, Alec, why would they tag and trade Sam Darnold? The obvious answer to that is you could generate draft capital in the present. And what does this team need in the present? They need draft capital because they only have 4 picks, a first rounder, a third round comp pick, and 2 fifth rounders. And they have a lot of holes. Interior offensive line, interior defensive line, running back, potentially cornerback, safety. We'll see what happens. So a tag and trade would give the Vikings more picks in the present. And then obviously they wouldn't be on the books for the franchise tag money. And it would just allow the other team that would trade for Sam Darnold on the tag to secure his services. And that would benefit them. So as you hear sirens in the background, because I'm recording this from my hotel room, I think that even remains an option. Now, we'll see the teams that could be in the Sam Darnold market. I expect the Raiders to be one of those. I wouldn't be shocked if the Steelers were one of them. The Tennessee Titans are an intriguing one. I've heard people mention the Giants, and I would say 2 things come to mind with the Giants. The first is, would Sam Darnold be willing to place himself in an environment like that? And I think, just knowing him and what he values, I think the answer to that would be no, considering the turbulence that has gone on within that organization, and just knowing that Sam knows what it's like to play in that New York market. And he also has a firsthand account from Daniel Jones as well. So I just don't see the Giants for that reason, but also, I think they are going to be fishing in waters. We'll see what happens with Matthew Stafford, but I would imagine they would have interest there. I know that I'm not the first to bring this up, but just hearing things here, it just validates that conversation. And if it's not him, they're picking third. And so drafting a guy at that spot would also make sense. So I with the tag and trade, who knows? Again, maybe the Titans that were picking at 1, they decide to either take Penn State's Abdul Carter, the edge rusher, or trade down, and they still need a quarterback because they're not convinced that Will Levis is the guy. There's a lot of machinations, and a lot that could go on because any quarterback signing in a particular spot or preffing a particular spot would be an indication for another team that they have to adapt their plan. So, like the Steelers are an interesting one because they have said openly, both their GM and their owner, that they want to re-sign a Justin Fields or a Russell Wilson. But even in doing that, it would be hard for me to fathom that would be any long-term answer. In fact, I'd be almost shocked. Now, I kind of like Justin Fields just as me, the evaluator type, where he's just intriguing to me, but it wouldn't shock me if that ultimately became an option. So the first place I wanted to start on this podcast through 2 days of being here is that any definitive comment regarding what the Vikings are going to do with Sam Darnold, to me, that's just, it would be faulty. Now, again, this stuff changes fast. There's a lot of conversations being had. So we shall see. But I also think just in having conversations, it is extremely hard to envision a scenario in which the Vikings can do what they want to do in terms of fortifying the interior of the offensive line specifically, but also the interior of the defensive line, And then adding at running back, whether it's through the draft or bringing back Aaron Jones and potentially bringing back Byron Murphy. Like, it is very hard to envision them being able to do all that they want to do while also bringing Sam Darnold back, unless it is at a number that is below what we all kind of, what the market seems to sound like for Sam. Like, if he can get the Baker Mayfield type contract of $33 million in average annual value, it's hard for me to think that the Vikings could do that and also do the other things that they want to do to set themselves up optimally. Now, if the market for Sam Darnold doesn't end up being what it's kind of what we've assumed it to be in that 33, 35, $40 million range, and Sam would only cost a 25, a 20 mil. I mean, then you start to wade into the conversation of, would you rather pay Sam Darnold 20 million or 25 million or Daniel Jones 12 million? I mean, again, those are arguments, conversations that are worth having. And I'd be curious to see in the comments or via social media what you guys would say to that. But unless the number falls to a level that I think would be unforeseen at this point, it's hard to envision the Vikings being able to do all that they want to do while paying him what it seems like the market's going to be. So that's what I wanted to say as far as Sam Darnold. That's going to be the conversation that people are probably most interested in. So I thought I'd start it at the top. Now, Thursday, I mean, if I'm coming on here and I have a totally different perspective, it's probably based upon a conversation or two that I've had with people who really matter in terms of decision making or have a very good perspective of what's going on behind the scenes. The second thing I'd say, and it's tangentially related, because I said for the Vikings to do what they want to do with interior offensive line and defensive line. I mean, I know I've said it on the podcast. People have asked me what the Vikings are going to value this offseason, and I have mentioned these two positions, but just from what I have heard, be it in free agency and the draft, I mean, these two positions are going to receive massive amounts of attention in terms of evaluation, but also probably resources when the time comes. I mean, I know there have been meetings and will continue to be meetings with interior defensive linemen in terms of potential draftees, and that's been a position that they've targeted in the draft the last couple of years. It just hasn't happened. So that's what I'd say. Like, just the more you spend time around this place and you hear people talk about where the Vikings are and what they're interested in, all that stuff, like, those are the positions that come up and that must. I mean, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said this, and I tweeted it, but like, you hear behind the scenes even further validations of this quote. He said, to play January football, there's a certain way you've got to play. You've got to be able to control the ball, be able to get to the passer with just 4. We need to get better and will. And that's obvious, and you guys listening to that might be like, you're just now figuring that out. But I would say, like, let's be very mindful of the fact that last year they only had a certain amount of cap space because they had the dead cap hits of Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter. And so with that cap space that they had last year that was still constrained, they chose to use that on defense. And I don't need to tell you guys how that worked out. Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard both were deserving of being in the all-pro conversation. Blake Cashman was phenomenal. I mean, Jihad Ward made an impact. Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin played considerable amounts of snaps. So what I'd say is, like, yes, it's like, man, it'd be nice to have heard Kwesi say this before, but the reality is you can't plug all holes at once unless you are drafting at the most optimal level, which they obviously have not been, and you have a ton of free agent money to spend. And the teams that have both of those are probably the ones that aren't winning a lot of games, because that's the way this league works. It kind of benefits you to be bad in some way to allow you to flip it over pretty quickly. So that's what I would offer in terms of I just want to I want to cement / exclamation point the emphasis that I've placed and that you guys should be thinking about in terms of where resources are going to go on the interior defensive line, interior offensive line, because I think they believe those additions would have exponential effects for the offense and the defense. So that's what I'd say in that regard. The team hired, this news is official, you guys have seen it. They hired Keith Carter as the assistant offensive line coach. For those of you who did not know, when the Jaguars hired Grant Udinski, who had been the Vikings assistant quarterbacks coach, when they had hired him to be their offensive coordinator, Grant brought with him the assistant offensive line coach for the Vikings, Sean Sterrett. So the Vikings needed to fill this void, and they did it with Keith Carter. Now, if you Google Keith Carter's name, you're going to see a lot of stuff. I mean, there were former players, Taylor Lewan, who's with Bussin' with the Boys, the podcast that you guys are probably familiar of. He was never one to shy away from being critical of Keith Carter's coaching style. It's very demanding. It's very intense. It probably borders. I mean, when you start to read that type of stuff, it makes sense that certain coaching styles can work in this era of the game, and they probably can work depending on the success you're having. But Keith Carter was exposed to Arthur Smith's running style and running game and running concepts in Tennessee. I'd say Arthur Smith's calling card as a coordinator and even as a head coach play caller was the run game. And then Keith Carter was in New York with the Jets and kind of in charge of that run game. So he's a guy who's very familiar with it. I think with Chris Cooper still leading that room, it gives it a good balance. And then, I mean, we've seen with Brian Flores here in Minnesota that when you add a coach who is demanding, who is intense, who is fierce, who can be intimidating, and you place him within this environment that Kevin O'Connell has built, it can really work. And so that's what I'd say in terms of what rather than making judgments one way or another, like, oh man, this is going to fix everything. I wouldn't go that far. I'd like to see it before giving them flowers for making this hire, or this is a terrible move that's going to be really hard on the play. Like, but I think everyone is entitled to the impression in person. So that's what I would say. But it is, I will say, just from my standpoint, having evaluated the run game as much as I have and talked about it as much as I have, is refreshing to see that they've done something beyond the personnel or talking about it to try to improve in that regard. And I do think they need to establish an identity. And I will say this, you can't establish an identity until you know the personnel you have. So depending on the player they draft, or whether they bring back Aaron Jones, or whether it's a Javonte Williams from the Broncos who's a free agent, for me, like, I think the Keith Carter hire and then the personnel additions that they make at running back will allow them to just totally hit the reset button in terms of what they want to do with the run game. And then it's going to be incumbent upon Kevin O'Connell seeing that it works a little bit and then just fully buying in. And it's not sexy and it's not always the most fun to gain 6 yards, but over the course of a game and to win late in the season, we all know, those listening to this and me and the people on the staff know, because I've talked to them about it, that committing to that is incredibly important. So interesting hire. Again, from my standpoint, it was good to see it. Now they must prove beyond any additions that they've made. I mean, after 2022, I remember sitting at the combine with Kevin O'Connell and him saying that they got to run the football better, and they added Josh Oliver, and that was great. But then we've seen that hasn't secured anything. Then last year, we need to kind of move on from Alexander Mattison, have a more dynamic back. They sign Aaron Jones, and that's great. And there were times where he definitely moved the football, but you have to factor in not having Christian Darrisaw, and there's a lot of factors at play. But the reality is, there's been a lot of talk about it. There's been a lot of adjustments. Until I see the growth, I'm not going to fully buy in. But I do think it is a positive sign that you'd have an internal evaluation in terms of what can we do to improve this, and you hire a guy who has done the job as the number one, as a run game coordinator and offensive line coach. To me, that's a positive thing. Some other aspects that I'll touch on briefly, and I have dinner and I gotta go roam around and probably go back to the lobby and sit down with Roger Goodell. I'm kidding, but I would love to talk to him if he has some time for a Vikings beat writer. Like Byron Murphy Jr., what I'd say is he and Cam Bynum, I've said this before, they're both represented by Clutch Sports. Their agents, their primary agents are not the same, but those two, and Demarius Bilbo and Zeke Sandu, are very close. So I would expect I would expect to have more information coming out of this week in terms of the likelihood of bringing those guys back. But from what I know, I mean, those are both still in play. Now, I've said this on the podcast plenty of times, but Cam Bynum and the Vikings negotiated an extension leading up to the season. It didn't happen. So how willing to budge would Cam Bynum's representatives be? I think that's a very valid question. It probably is tied to, well, how much does Cam want to be here in Minnesota versus how willing is he to take more money to go elsewhere? I mean, that's the conversation. But then you got to think, if you're Cam Bynum's representatives, like, how much can you really ask for? Even on the open market, how willing is the team going to be to pay that money? And I think that's a relevant conversation. But those two guys, and Byron Murphy specifically, I mean, I know they've been happy with the production, as they should be. Obviously the ball production, but also his willingness as a tackler, his ability to blitz. I mean, he just brings a lot. He's still young. He has a presence within the locker room. Like, all that stuff really matters. And then it'll be interesting to see, if they were to make that happen, how they would structure that. But I wouldn't rule that out. I would say that Zeke Sander, who represents Byron, also represented Danielle Hunter, and the dialogue with Danielle was always pretty positive as well. So we'll see kind of how that evolves. But I'm not ruling out either one of those. I feel similarly about Aaron Jones, and for him, it might be a matter of, like, how much did he really love being in Minnesota versus what type of opportunity does he want elsewhere? And to me, that's kind of the question, because I think even if the Vikings bring back Aaron Jones, drafting a guy, whether it's, I mean, who knows about first round, but whether it's third, fifth, what have you, I think his role would probably be, it wouldn't consist of as many snaps, and I think that would be a good thing for him in terms of overall health, because while he did play every game last year and he had 1,500 yards from scrimmage and it was a solid year from a counting stats perspective, I do think he would really benefit from just having someone to kind of work alongside. So that's what I'd say. I like to go off other aspects. I mean, there's still work I got to do in terms of the Kwesi extension conversation. I wouldn't be shocked if the Vikings were waiting in the top of the market, free agent market. And that's, like, I mean, you guys know the players who are supposed to be at the top of that market, specifically on the interior offensive line, interior defensive line. I did want to note Josh Hinkst, who had been one of the key people in the Vikings, like, sports performance staff. His contract had run out. He took the job with the Panthers. I said this on last week's pod, I think, but, like, it does make you wonder, like, were the Vikings willing to pay him as much as the Panthers? Were the Panthers more willing to pay him more money? And does that, should we ask questions? It's like, is ownership compensating the coaching staff as much as others? Like, I think that stuff is always worth asking. But in general, that's kind of the update early on. I think those are the subjects that probably people want to hear about. I will say this one is definitely primary subject that people would want to know. Like, every conversation with everybody that I've had regarding J.J. McCarthy has been very, very positive. I had questions coming into the combine about, like, his weight, and it sounds like he's above 200. I know he's raring to go. This guy lives it. He breathes it. I think he's very motivated to kind of prove and show what he had, similar to what he had during training camp. And so all signs with him sound good and sound like things could trend to it doesn't sound like there's any hesitation if he's the starter. Now he's going to have to prove it. And then I will also say in tandem with that, if Sam Darnold moves on, I do think Daniel Jones is probably the preferred option there. Now, well, you never know who else comes available and at what cost and all that stuff. But I do know they were very satisfied with what Daniel showed them in the time that he was in Minnesota, and they did that move for a reason, thinking he could fit at the price bracket that would allow them, again, to spend everywhere else, to spend on returning players like a Byron Murphy Jr. or potential big time free agents. So that's kind of how the rest of the quarterback group shakes out. Like I said, I'm going to be crisscrossing these hotel lobbies over the next few days, few nights, late nights, and I will be back Thursday with much more and Unload the Notebook. If you want more kind of my stuff, of what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, all that, please go check out The Athletic. Things start to kick up over the next few weeks, and it's one of my favorite times of the year. I'm sure you guys, listeners, it's similar, because it's fun to think about how this thing could evolve year over year. But yeah, it's a fun time in Indy. I appreciate those on YouTube watching in this hotel room that is really beautiful. And those in audio, always appreciate you guys listening. Please like and subscribe. That always helps us out. Stay tuned, stay locked in later this week and in the ensuing weeks for much more information regarding free agency, and then obviously the draft. It'll be relentless. It'll be fun. It'll be a lot. But that'll do it for episode 61 of the Alec Lewis Show, recording from an Indianapolis hotel room, and listening to sirens as I finish this podcast. Sounds about right from the Indianapolis NFL Scouting Combine. But we will talk to you guys shortly. Any questions that you have for me, throw in the comment section. Hit me on social media. I'll be as responsive as I can, or do the due diligence to come up with the answers to the questions. Thank you guys for listening. Talk to you guys later this week.